We start with some sad news as four-time PGA Tour winner and the man who broke the color barrier at the Masters in 1975, Lee Elder, passed away on Sunday at the age of 87.
Well, it was the only way for me. At that time, back in those days, it wasn't anything else you could do. In the 40s and 50s, what else could you do but go and caddy to try to advance to perhaps what you might have been thinking about a career in golf.
Right.
But I was not thinking about a career in golf. I was pretty much thinking more about survival.
In April 2021, Lee Elder stood on the first tee at Augusta National Golf Club. He was too frail to swing a club, but he held his driver and acknowledged the roaring applause. Standing beside him were Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player, golf legends welcoming him as an honorary starter at the Masters. To the cameras, it looked like the perfect ending to a story of triumph over racism. But what the cameras didn't show was the weight Lee Elder carried to that tee box. The decades of exclusion, humiliation, and deliberate sabotage that nearly broke him before he ever got there. This is the story of what it actually cost to be the first black golfer at the Masters. And it's not the story you've been told. Lee Elder didn't just face racism in golf. He faced an organized system of exclusion designed by specific people with specific goals to keep him out, to humiliate him when he got in, and to make sure he never felt welcome even after he proved he belonged. Before we dive into who these people were and what they did, hit that subscribe button because this story matters, and the algorithm needs to know that stories like this matter. When Lee Elder entered the PGA Tour in the late 1960s, he was walking into a world that had been legally forced to open its doors, but remained socially locked. The PGA had removed its Caucasian-only clause from its constitution in 1961. On paper, black golfers could compete. In practice, everything was designed to make sure they failed. Elder came from the United Golf Association, the black touring circuit where he learned the game alongside legends like Charlie Sifford and Ted Rhodes. The UGA was called the Chitlin Circuit. Players traveled together, ate together, and supported each other. It was a community. The PGA Tour was the opposite. It was isolation. Elite white professionals treated black golfers like intruders in a gentleman's club, and they had 6 distinct ways of making that clear. The first barrier was institutional, and it had a name: Clifford Roberts. Roberts was the co-founder and chairman of Augusta National Golf Club. He was not just a traditionalist, he was an active enforcer of racial hierarchy. His famous declaration says it all. As long as I'm alive, all the golfers will be white and all the caddies will be black. That wasn't a personal opinion. It was the operational policy of the Masters tournament for decades. Roberts viewed Augusta National as a sanctuary from the changes happening in American society, and he used the complex qualification rules of the Masters as a weapon to keep it that way. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, as black players began winning PGA Tour events, the criteria for Masters invitations seemed to shift constantly. When Charlie Sifford won the 1967 Greater Hartford Open and the 1969 Los Angeles Open, he was never invited to the Masters. The unwritten rule had been that PGA Tour winners got invitations, but suddenly Roberts emphasized the point system, major wins, or the discretion of the committee. This was institutional racism operating through bureaucracy. Roberts maintained a facade of meritocracy while constantly moving the goalposts. Lee Elder watched this happen to Sifford. He knew that even if he won, Roberts would find a way to keep him out. Then in 1974, Elder won the Monsanto Open in Pensacola, Florida. This victory created a paradox for Roberts. To deny Elder now would expose the racism of Augusta too nakedly to a watching world. The civil rights movement had changed the country. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated 6 years earlier. The media pressure was mounting. Congressmen were lobbying Roberts directly, so Roberts extended the invitation. But it was not a gesture of welcome. It was a capitulation. When Roberts called Elder personally, something remarkable happened. Elder told Roberts he would have to think about it. He made the chairman of Augusta National wait. This was a black man debating whether the honor of Augusta was worth the danger it invited. And Elder knew it would be dangerous, because accepting that invitation meant painting a target on his back. Elder never forgave Roberts because he understood that the invitation came from duress, not respect. Roberts was a man who would rather have kept the gates closed forever. The honor of playing in the Masters was tainted by the knowledge that the host despised his presence. But Roberts wasn't the only obstacle. The petty racism Elder faced at the club level was just as crushing, and it happened at the very tournament that got him to Augusta. In 1968, when Elder first played the Monsanto Open in Pensacola, he was barred from entering the clubhouse. Despite being a professional golfer and one of the tournament's main attractions, fans. He and other black players had to change their shoes in the parking lot. While white players enjoyed locker rooms, showers, and dining facilities, Elder ate sandwiches in his car. This exclusion was enforced by a specific group of Pensacola Country Club members. Elder later referred to them as symbols of petty racism. They stood watch, making sure the color line was maintained. The visual of a professional athlete eating in a parking lot while members watched from the veranda became one of the defining images of Elder's struggle. The clubhouse is sacred space in golf culture. It's where business happens, where networks are built, where status is conferred. To be barred from the clubhouse is to be told you're labor, not a peer. It reduces the black golfer to the status of a gardener or a caddy, someone allowed on the grass to perform a function, but forbidden from the social communion of the sport. These officials serve no logistical purpose other than humiliation. They weren't protecting the integrity of the game. They were protecting the sanctity of their social space from what they saw as contamination. When Elder returned to Pensacola in 1974 and won the Monsanto Open, the irony was thick. To qualify for the Masters in Roberts Domain, he had to conquer the tournament hosted by the men who had forced him to eat in his car. He took their trophy, but he never forgot what they did. While Roberts worked to keep Elder out and club officials worked to humiliate him, the players themselves created a third barrier, the wall of silence. Elder frequently cited a core group of 5 or 6 regular PGA pros who refused to speak to him. This wasn't about what was said, it was about what was withheld: recognition, camaraderie, basic human acknowledgement. These men, the stalwarts of the tour, refused to look Elder in the eye in locker rooms. They created what Elder described as a cold, hostile environment that was more painful than the outward threats from fans. This was social ostracization used to enforce group norms. By refusing to engage with Elder, these players signaled that while he might be legally present, he was not socially present. He was a ghost. These weren't the superstars like Jack Nicklaus or Arnold Palmer, who were generally more welcoming or indifferent. These were journeymen pros, the rank and file who felt their livelihoods were threatened. In the 1960s, PGA Tour purses were small. Only top finishers got paid. The entry of black golfers represented not just a social threat, but an economic one. Every dollar Lee Elder won was a dollar a white journeyman didn't earn, so they operated as a blockade. Elder remained isolated on the road, unable to share travel expenses, dining tips, or course knowledge. These were vital networks for survival on the tour. The wall of silence forced Elder to rely entirely on his wife Rose and a small circle of black friends. It turned the tour into a lonely, solitary grind. Elder struggled to forgive this group because their cowardice came from his peers. These were men who understood the difficulty of the game and the pressure of the tour, yet chose to deny him empathy when history called. If you're realizing just how brutal this system was, leave a comment. What would you have done in Lee Elder's position? Would you have kept fighting, or would the isolation have broken you? The fourth barrier Elder faced was geopolitical, and it came from an unexpected source: Gary Player. In 1971, the South African champion invited Lee Elder to participate in the South African PGA Championship. This was the first integrated tournament in South African history. The country was under the brutal grip of apartheid. On the surface, the invitation seemed like progress, a crack in the granite of racial separation, but the political context transformed it into a trap. South Africa was facing increasing international isolation. The anti-apartheid movement was targeting sports as a primary lever of pressure, calling for boycotts of South African teams and athletes. By inviting Elder, Gary Player, and the Vorster regime, sought to show the world a smiling face of racial cooperation. Elder's acceptance drew immediate and ferocious criticism from U.S. civil rights leaders and the African American community. He was accused of allowing himself to be used as a pawn to whitewash apartheid. Critics argued that Elder's presence would be used by the South African government to claim that sports in the country were normalizing, thereby undermining the boycott movement. Elder felt that Player had used him as a political shield. Player had frequently supported separate development in his early years and had defended his country's policies in the press. Inviting a black American golfer was a masterstroke of public relations. It shifted the conversation from the oppression of black South Africans to the generosity of the white host. The pain for Elder was twofold. First, he was being manipulated by a white superstar who had the luxury of political neutrality. Second, this manipulation caused him to be ostracized by his own community. He was labeled a traitor by those he sought to represent. Elder negotiated conditions for his appearance. He demanded that the gallery at the tournament be integrated. While this demand was met met for the specific event, it did little to change the structural reality of South Africa. Elder played in front of an integrated crowd, but once the tournament ended, the black spectators returned to their townships and the white spectators to their suburbs. The integration was a temporary stage set, constructed for cameras with Elder as the lead actor. Decades later, Elder and Player reconciled. They became friends. Player later admitted he had been brainwashed about apartheid, and in 2021, Player stood beside Elder on that first tee at Augusta. But the reconciliation doesn't erase what happened in 1971. Elder could shake Gary Player's hand in 2021, but the wound from being used as a geopolitical prop never fully healed. The fifth and most dangerous barrier came in Memphis in 1970, and it nearly killed him. Elder was leading the Memphis Classic. He was playing well, threatening to become the first black winner of a PGA Tour event in the South. This possibility was intolerable to a segment of the local population. While Elder was playing the 15th hole, fans intentionally moved his ball. Several people jumped the fence, grabbed his ball, and threw it into the road. They called him racial slurs. This wasn't an accidental disruption. It was deliberate sabotage designed to prevent a black man from winning. The critical failure came from the tournament officials. In golf, the rules cover outside agency interference. If a spectator moves a ball, it should be replaced without penalty. But the handling of the situation in Memphis was chaotic and punitive. Elder felt that officials did not adequately investigate or rectify the situation. They effectively allowed the mob to dictate the score. By failing to protect the field of play, the officials became accomplices. Then the death threats started. Callers threatened Elder's wife and his life. They had to stay in a motel under armed guard. The next day, guards walked in the fairway while Elder played. The Memphis officials had allowed the gallery to become a weapon. They failed in their primary duty to ensure a fair and safe competition. By permitting a chaotic, hostile environment to fester, they turned a sporting event into something dangerous. Elder ultimately did not win the tournament, and he always believed that the interference and the officials' failure to stop it cost him the title. This was mob racism, sanctioned by the negligence of authority. These five groups operated as a gauntlet. Roberts tried to keep him out of the majors. The Pensacola officials tried to humiliate him at the club. The PGA Old Guard tried to isolate him socially. Memphis officials allowed the mob to rob him, and Player tried to use him for political cover. Elder was fighting a battle on five fronts simultaneously. When Elder finally drove down Magnolia Lane in April 1975 for his first Masters, it was a victory over Clifford Roberts. But the scars remained. Elder rented 2 houses in Augusta to keep his location secret because of death threats. He ate surrounded by people for protection. The stress was overwhelming. He missed the cut. Roberts had lost the battle to keep him out, but he had won the battle of psychological attrition. Elder didn't play his best golf because he was too busy trying to survive. This is what it costs to be first. Not just the pressure of competition, but the weight of being hunted. Not just the challenge of a difficult golf course, but the challenge of staying alive on it. Lee Elder went on to play in the Masters 5 more times. He won 4 PGA Tour events. He represented the United States in the Ryder Cup. He was inducted into the World Golf Hall of Fame. And in his later years, he participated in ceremonial reconciliations. He possessed what observers called grace and civility. But grace is not the same as forgetting. Elder could stand on that first tee in 2021 and acknowledge the applause. He could shake hands with Gary Player. He could accept the ovation from Augusta National. But he never pretended that what happened to him was acceptable. He never offered cheap forgiveness to those who sabotaged his prime years. When Lee Elder died in November 2021, just months after that ceremony, his legacy was secure. But attached to that legacy is the shadow of the men and institutions who proved that in the genteel world of golf, a rulebook could be a weapon of hate. Elder's refusal to forget is not a sign of bitterness. It's a final act of self-respect. It's an assertion that while the game may move on, the score must still be kept. He identified the racism he faced, he named it, and he remembered it. That's the story of Lee Elder. Not just the story of the first black golfer at the Masters, but the story of what he endured to get there. The institutional barriers, the petty humiliations, the wall of silence, the political exploitation, and the physical danger. If this story moved you, if it made you see golf history differently, leave a comment below, share this video, and subscribe to this channel, because Lee Elder's story deserves to be told fully and honestly. Not sanitized, not simplified, but respected. Lee Elder didn't just play through racism, he survived it, and his survival is the real triumph.